You know, the story of the United States is just immense. It's this wild ride from a few scrappy colonies to a full-blown global superpower. It's a tale packed with ambition, conflict, and some pretty radical reinvention. So today we're going to break down the key moments, the very DNA that built this nation and put it on its unbelievable path. Okay, let's get into it. I mean, that's a huge thing to say, right? A modern Roman Empire. But when you think about it, it kind of captures the sheer scale of the nation's rise. In just a couple of centuries, it went from being this distant, rugged outpost to a dominant force in, well, pretty much everything, from military power to movies and music. So that's the big question we're tackling today. How on earth did that happen? What were the key decisions, the defining fights, the core ideas that fueled this incredible transformation? To really get the America of today, you have to go back to the very beginning. So let's do that. All right, we have to start at square one. We're talking about the chaotic and honestly pretty contradictory reasons that drove the first English settlers across the Atlantic. This wasn't some big organized plan. Nope, it was more like a messy collision of big dreams and even bigger ambitions. Okay, this slide is really interesting because it shows you the two competing ideas at the heart of the whole American experiment. On one side, you have Jamestown, basically a business startup. It was backed by a corporation, the London Company, and they were there to make money, plain and simple. But then you get Plymouth. This was all about religious freedom, founded by pilgrims who wanted to build a new society. And their Mayflower Compact, that was a huge early step toward the idea of people governing themselves. This tension between making a buck and chasing a higher ideal is something you'll see play out in America for centuries. And right as these seeds of liberty and profit are being planted, something else arrives. Something much, much darker. In 1619, the first enslaved Africans are brought to Virginia. And that right there, that single year, sets up the fundamental, tragic contradiction of the entire American story. A nation dreamed up in freedom, but built on the backs of slavery. So for the next 100 years or so, the colonies just grow and grow. They build their own economies, their own communities, and as they do, they start to feel, less like they're just a part of Great Britain and more like something totally new, something American. The revolution didn't just happen overnight. It was a slow burn, this escalating series of moves and countermoves. Britain needed cash, so they hit the colonies with taxes, like the Stamp Act. The colonists fired back, saying their rights were being violated. And each step you see here just turned up the heat. The real kicker was the intolerable acts. This wasn't just a tax. They shut down Boston's entire port. People's livelihoods gone. They took away their right to govern themselves. It was meant to crush them. But instead, it did the opposite. It brought all the colonies together against one enemy. And this is the breaking point. On a quiet town green in Massachusetts, a standoff between local farmers with muskets and professional British soldiers turns violent. And just like that, it's not about taxes anymore. It's about rebellion. It's about war. Just a little over a year later, the rebels lay all their cards on the table. The Declaration of Independence wasn't just a "we're breaking up" letter to the king. No way. It was this radical, world-changing idea that a government should get its power from the people it governs. These were words so powerful, they didn't just fuel a revolution at home. They would inspire people all over the globe. So after winning a brutal war, the new country had another huge problem. How do you build a government that's strong, but not too strong? They came up with something totally new, a system built on tension. You have these three branches, all designed to keep each other in check. Congress can make a law, but the president can say nope and veto it. But then Congress can turn around and override that veto. And the Supreme Court can look at a law from either of them and say, actually, that's unconstitutional. It was a whole new playbook, built on a healthy distrust of power. With a new government locked in, the young, ambitious nation looked west. And the next chapter of its story would be all about explosive, almost unbelievable growth, all the way across the continent. I mean, just look at the speed of this thing. In less than 50 years, the U.S. goes from a string of states on the East Coast to a true continental power. It kicks off with the Louisiana Purchase, which literally doubles the country's size overnight. But let's be clear, this growth came at a staggering human cost, through the forced, brutal removal of Native Americans from their homes, and through a war with Mexico that added the entire Southwest to the map. So what was the idea that fueled all this? It actually had a name: Manifest Destiny. This wasn't just a political strategy. It was treated almost like a religion. It was this powerful belief that the United States had a God-given right, a destiny, to spread its way of life from coast to coast. It was the ultimate justification for expansion. But while the nation was getting bigger, that deep contradiction we talked about, the one from 1619, was becoming a crisis that couldn't be ignored. The huge question of whether all this new land would be home to free people or enslaved people was about to push the whole American experiment to the brink of total collapse. By the middle of the 1800s, you're basically looking at two different countries sharing one border. This slide lays it out perfectly. You've got the North building factories powered by free labor, and you've got the South, an agricultural society whose entire economy depended on the brutal institution of slavery. These weren't just small differences. They created two totally different worlds that were headed straight for a collision. And this was the final straw. Abraham Lincoln gets elected on a promise to stop slavery from spreading any further. For the South, this was an absolute disaster, an existential threat. They were terrified that the federal government would eventually end slavery everywhere. So 11 states decided to just leave. They broke away, formed their own country, and set the stage for war. The war that came next was just devastating. A brutal, bloody 4-year nightmare that tore the country in two. Let that number sink in for a second. Over 600,000 soldiers died. That's more Americans than died in World War I and World War II combined. This was the ultimate horrifying test of whether this nation could even survive. But out of all that death and destruction came something truly transformative. What some people call America's Second Revolution. The Union's victory led to 3 massive changes to the Constitution. The 13th Amendment ended slavery, for good. The 14th made it clear that anyone born here is a citizen with equal protection. And the 15th guaranteed the right to vote. Together, they were a radical attempt to remake the nation around the idea of equality. So the war was over. Slavery was abolished. The country was whole again. But the fight to actually live up to those new promises, to truly heal those deep, deep wounds, well, that was really just beginning. You see, for a while after the war, during a period called Reconstruction, there was a real effort to rebuild the South and protect the rights of 4 million newly freed people. But it was cut short. A shady backroom political deal in 1877 to settle who would be president led to the last federal troops being pulled out of the South. For African Americans, this was a complete and utter betrayal. Without that protection, their new rights were stripped away, one by one, leading to nearly 100 years of segregation and oppression. And that compromise really brings us to the edge of the modern era. The nation had survived its greatest test. It was now one giant country with a powerful government. The stage was set for everything that came next. The boom of industry, massive waves of immigration, and the world wars that would finally turn the United States into the superpower we see today. But all of it was built on the foundations we just explored, the incredible resources, the unique political system, and those deep, unresolved contradictions. The story is, and always has been, very much unfinished. And how the nation chooses to deal with that complicated history is still the biggest question in its ongoing experiment.